Once, their name was synonymous with power, wealth, and high society. A symbol of America's Gilded Age, the Vanderbilts built grand mansions, ruled industries, and embodied the American dream in its most extreme form. Today, though, the Vanderbilt empire is largely a relic of history, and the vast fortune that once defined them has dwindled to almost nothing. At the heart of this story is a powerful legacy, not just of money and influence, but also of love, tragedy, and survival. Today, we're focusing on the last heirs of this mighty dynasty, two brothers, Anderson Cooper and Carter Vanderbilt Cooper. Both sons of Gloria Vanderbilt, the iconic heiress, fashion designer, and socialite who embodied the highs and lows of the family's spectacular rise and fall. Behind their world-famous mother, behind Anderson Cooper's carefully curated public image as a respected journalist, is a story that is both intensely personal and overwhelmingly tragic. A story of strained family ties, loss, and grief. But also of perseverance and reinvention. Anderson Cooper, a household name, and his lesser-known brother, Carter Vanderbilt Cooper, led very different lives. But the bond they shared, the influence of their mother, and the shadow of their family's troubled past shaped their fates in ways that would ultimately lead to heartbreak. This is a tale of wealth, but not one of happiness. A tale of family, but not always of closeness. A tale of tragedy that left scars on those who survived. Let's go back to the beginning, to understand how the Vanderbilt empire crumbled, and how the last two heirs of this once great dynasty, Anderson and Carter, lived in its long shadow. The Vanderbilt story starts with one man, Cornelius Vanderbilt, born in 1794. A self-made industrialist, Cornelius rose from humble beginnings to become one of the richest men in American history. His fortune came from railroads and shipping, industries that transformed America in the 19th century. He became known as the Commodore, and his ruthless business practices made him a symbol of the American robber baron. When Cornelius died in 1877, he left behind a fortune estimated at more than $100 million, a staggering amount in those days, worth more than $3 billion in today's dollars. The Vanderbilt name quickly became associated with unimaginable wealth and high society. But wealth alone couldn't save the family from its own internal strife. His descendants, including his grandsons and great-grandsons, would squander the vast fortune on extravagant lifestyles and opulent homes. The massive Gilded Age mansions, like the Breakers in Newport and the Vanderbilt mansions in New York City, became symbols of their wealth and their downfall. Within just a few generations, the empire that Cornelius Vanderbilt built would be almost entirely gone. But this story isn't just about the money. It's about the legacy that shaped the family's descendants, particularly Anderson and Carter, who would grow up with the burden of a name that represented both triumph and tragedy. By the time Anderson Cooper was born in 1967, the Vanderbilt fortune had been largely dissipated, but the family's fame and notoriety endured. His mother, Gloria Vanderbilt, was one of the last prominent figures to bear the name, and she carried her own legacy of scandal and heartbreak. Gloria Vanderbilt was born in 1924, the daughter of Reginald Claypool Vanderbilt and his second wife, Gloria Morgan. Reginald Vanderbilt was the great-grandson of Cornelius Vanderbilt and had inherited a portion of the family fortune. But by the time Gloria was born, much of it was already gone. Reginald, a notorious gambler and playboy, wasted vast sums of money on alcohol and gambling. When he died in 1925, when Gloria was just an infant, he left behind little more than debts. Young Gloria became the center of one of the most sensational court battles in American history, known as the Trial of the Century. Her mother, Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt, was accused by her paternal aunt, Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, of being an unfit mother. The media frenzy around the custody trial was immense, with accusations of neglect, scandalous behavior, and even hints of lesbianism surrounding Gloria's mother. In the end, Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney won custody of the young heiress, and Gloria's relationship with her mother was forever fractured. This tumultuous childhood, dominated by scandal, public scrutiny, and emotional abandonment, would profoundly shape Gloria Vanderbilt's future, as well as her relationships with her own children. The Vanderbilt family was plagued by what many have referred to as the Vanderbilt curse. Despite their enormous wealth, the family was no stranger to tragedy. Gloria's father died when she was a baby, her aunt committed suicide, and other members of the family struggled with mental health issues, early deaths, and personal scandals. Gloria herself would face many personal losses throughout her life, but none as painful as the loss of her son, Carter. Gloria Vanderbilt's life was one of constant reinvention. In the 1940s and 1950s, she became a celebrated socialite, artist, and actress. Later, in the 1970s, she built a successful fashion empire, becoming best known for her designer jeans. Her name was on the lips of the wealthy elite, and her face graced magazine covers. But behind the glamorous exterior, Gloria's personal life was filled with turmoil. She was married 4 times, but it was her 4th marriage, to writer Wyatt Cooper, that finally brought her some stability. Wyatt, a Southern writer and screenwriter, was known for his warmth and kindness. He adored Gloria and was a devoted father to their 2 sons, Carter and Anderson. Unlike many of Gloria's previous relationships, this marriage seemed happy and full of love. Carter Vanderbilt Cooper, born in 1965, was the first child of Gloria and Wyatt. Anderson Hayes Cooper was born 2 years later, in 1967. Gloria adored her sons, and Wyatt was a doting father who cherished family life. But their happy family was shattered when Wyatt died unexpectedly in 1978, during open heart surgery. Anderson was just 10 years old at the time, and Carter was 13. Wyatt's death had a profound impact on the family. For Anderson, his father's death marked the end of his childhood. In interviews, he has often spoken about how losing his father left him feeling isolated and abandoned, a feeling that would haunt him throughout his life. Gloria, too, was devastated by the loss. Wyatt had been the love of her life, and without him, she struggled to find direction. As Gloria tried to cope with her grief, she threw herself into her work, continuing to build her fashion empire and maintain her place in the public eye. But her relationship with her sons became strained as they grew older. Both Carter and Anderson were deeply affected by their father's death, but they processed their grief in different ways. Carter, the older of the 2, was seen as the more introspective and sensitive brother. He was an intellectual, someone who loved literature and philosophy. Anderson, on the other hand, was more outgoing and driven, traits that would later help him become a successful journalist. Despite their differences, the brothers shared a close bond, united by their love for their mother and their shared grief over their father's death. But beneath the surface, there was tension. Gloria, always a larger-than-life figure, could be controlling and overbearing. Anderson and Carter both felt the weight of their family's history and the expectations placed upon them as the last heirs of the Vanderbilt name. On July 22, 1988, tragedy struck the Vanderbilt Cooper family in a way that would forever change their lives. Carter Vanderbilt Cooper, just 23 years old, died by suicide when he jumped from the 14th floor terrace of his mother's New York City apartment. The events of that day remain a source of deep pain and mystery, as Gloria Vanderbilt was present when her son took his own life. According to Gloria, the day began normally, but something in Carter's demeanor had shifted. He seemed distant, preoccupied, but she didn't suspect anything out of the ordinary. That afternoon, as they sat together in the living room, Carter suddenly stood up, walked to the terrace, and climbed over the edge. Gloria, in a state of shock, rushed after him, pleading with him to come back inside. She grabbed hold of his leg, trying to pull him to safety, but in an instant, he let go and fell to his death. The shock of Carter's death sent ripples through the family. Gloria was inconsolable, haunted by the image of her son's final moments. Anderson, then just 21, was devastated by the loss of his brother, his closest confidant. In the years that followed, Anderson would speak openly about the profound impact Carter's death had on his life, describing it as a wound that never fully healed. The circumstances surrounding Carter's death have remained a topic of speculation for years. Gloria herself believed that Carter may have been suffering from a psychotic episode, possibly triggered by medication he had been taking at the time. Others have suggested that the pressures of his family legacy, the weight of expectations, and unresolved grief over his father's death may have contributed to his tragic decision. Regardless of the cause, Carter's death marked a turning point for the Vanderbilt Cooper family, a final chapter in the long, tragic history of the Vanderbilts. For Anderson, the loss of his brother was deeply personal and life-changing. As the surviving son, he now bore the full weight of the Vanderbilt legacy. But unlike many of his ancestors, Anderson didn't embrace the family's public persona of wealth and grandeur. Instead, he distanced himself from the Vanderbilt name, choosing to carve his own path as a journalist. But the trauma of Carter's death never left him. Anderson Cooper's path to becoming one of America's most respected journalists wasn't straightforward. While he was born into extraordinary privilege as the son of Gloria Vanderbilt, he was also no stranger to pain and loss. The death of his father when Anderson was just 10, followed by Carter's tragic suicide when he was 21, left Anderson feeling unmoored. These experiences shaped his worldview and motivated his career in a profound way. After graduating from Yale University in 1989, Anderson was determined to make a name for himself, on his own terms. He didn't want to rely on his family connections or the Vanderbilt name to find success. Instead, Anderson started his career in journalism by taking the unconventional route. He worked as a freelance correspondent, traveling to some of the world's most dangerous conflict zones, including Rwanda, Somalia, and Bosnia, often reporting without the backing of a major news network. Anderson's early career was defined by his relentless drive and his willingness to put himself in harm's way to get the story. He was deeply affected by the suffering he witnessed in these war-torn regions. In interviews, he's spoken about how witnessing death and destruction so closely helped him process the losses he had endured in his own life. In a sense, Anderson's career in journalism became a way for him to make sense of the pain and tragedy that had shaped his family's history. By the early 2000s, Anderson's dedication and hard work began to pay off. He joined CNN as a full-time correspondent and eventually became the anchor of Anderson Cooper 360 Degrees, a show that allowed him to cover both major news events and personal human interest stories. Anderson's calm, empathetic style of reporting made him a trusted voice during times of national crisis, such as Hurricane Katrina, the Haiti earthquake, and the 9/11 attacks. But even as Anderson became a household name, he remained deeply private about his personal life. It wasn't until much later, in his 2016 memoir The Rainbow Comes and Goes, that Anderson began to open up about his relationship with his mother, his brother, and the personal struggles he had endured throughout his life. In many ways, Anderson's career has been defined by his desire to step out from the shadow of the Vanderbilt legacy and make his own mark on the world. But no matter how far he tried to distance himself from his family's past, the name Vanderbilt would always follow him. In interviews, Anderson has often expressed ambivalence about his family's wealth and history. He's spoken about how, growing up, he never felt connected to the Vanderbilt legacy, since by the time he was born, much of the family's fortune was already gone. Anderson's mother, Gloria Vanderbilt, lived to see her son become a globally recognized journalist. But their relationship wasn't without its complexities. Anderson has described Gloria as both an extraordinary mother and a difficult one. She was an icon, a woman who had survived her own trials and tribulations, but she could also be emotionally distant and consumed by her own public image. Despite this, the bond between mother and son deepened as they both grew older. In The Rainbow Comes and Goes, Anderson shared intimate letters exchanged between himself and Gloria in the last years of her life, revealing the depth of their love, but also the unspoken pain that had lingered between them for so long. For Anderson Cooper, the Vanderbilt legacy has always been a double-edged sword. On one hand, the family name opened doors and provided a sense of history and prestige. But on the other, it came with the baggage of a troubled past, scandal, loss, and tragedy that could not be ignored. In interviews, Anderson has spoken about how growing up, he was acutely aware of the fall from grace that the Vanderbilt family had experienced. By the time he was a child, the grand mansions were being sold off, the vast fortune had evaporated, and what was left was the story of a family that had once ruled American society but had lost nearly everything. Anderson has admitted that he feels disconnected from the extravagant wealth and the Gilded Age excesses that defined his ancestors. While many assume that the Vanderbilt fortune was passed down to him, Anderson has repeatedly clarified that he didn't inherit much money from his family. His mother, Gloria, despite having been an heiress, was not fabulously wealthy in her later years, having largely lived off her earnings as a designer. In fact, Anderson has often said that he believes growing up without a large inheritance was a blessing. It forced him to work for his success, to build a career that was entirely his own. And in doing so, he managed to separate himself from the ghost of the Vanderbilt dynasty that loomed over his life. Still, there are echoes of the past that Anderson has never been able to fully escape. The story of the Vanderbilts is, at its core, a story of loss. The loss of fortune, the loss of influence, and the loss of family. From the moment Cornelius Vanderbilt's descendants squandered the family fortune, the Vanderbilts have been a family haunted by their own legacy. Carter's death was the most personal and painful manifestation of this curse for Anderson, but it was also part of a larger narrative of tragedy that has plagued the family for generations. For Anderson, the lesson of the Vanderbilt story is clear. Wealth cannot protect you from pain, and privilege cannot shield you from tragedy. The Vanderbilt name may still carry weight in society, but the real story is one of human frailty, of lives lived in the public eye but filled with private sorrow. In her later years, Gloria Vanderbilt remained a fixture in American society, known for her elegance, creativity, and enduring resilience. She continued to paint and design until her final days, and she maintained a close relationship with Anderson, who became her primary caregiver as she aged. Gloria passed away on June 17, 2019, at the age of 95. Her death marked the end of an era. She was the last of the famous Vanderbilt line, the final direct connection to the family's extraordinary rise and fall. In the weeks following her death, Anderson reflected on her life and legacy in public statements and through his work at CNN. He described his mother as a woman who had experienced incredible highs and devastating lows but who had always found a way to keep going. Gloria's life was a testament to survival, not just of the Vanderbilt family, but of the human spirit. She had endured the trauma of her childhood custody battle, the loss of multiple loved ones, and the weight of public scrutiny. But through it all, she had managed to reinvent herself time and time again. She was not just a Vanderbilt, she was Gloria Vanderbilt, an icon in her own right. Anderson has often said that his mother's ability to reinvent herself, even in the face of tragedy, was something that he admired deeply. Despite their differences, he saw in her a strength that was unmatched, a determination to live life on her own terms, even when it seemed that everything was falling apart. In the years since his mother's death, Anderson Cooper has continued to reflect on the complicated legacy of his family. In interviews and public statements, he's spoken about how the loss of both his brother and mother has shaped his understanding of life, love, and loss. Anderson has been candid about his own struggles with grief. He's acknowledged that losing his father, brother, and mother has left him with a deep sense of loneliness, but also a greater appreciation for the fleeting nature of life. He's often described how his experiences of loss have made him more empathetic, more aware of the pain that others endure, and more committed to telling stories that matter. At the same time, Anderson has made it clear that he does not want to pass down the Vanderbilt legacy to his own children. In 2020, Anderson welcomed a son, Wyatt Morgan Cooper, named after his father. When asked about his son's future, Anderson has stated that he does not plan to leave his son an inheritance, saying that he believes that large sums of money can be a curse rather than a blessing. For Anderson, the true legacy he wants to pass down to his son is not one of wealth or fame, but of love, kindness, and resilience, the values that he learned from his parents, despite their flaws and despite the tragedies that marked their lives. As we look back on the Vanderbilt story, we see a family that was defined by its extremes: extreme wealth, extreme success, and extreme loss. The Vanderbilt name may be synonymous with American royalty, but its history is a cautionary tale about the dangers of excess, the fragility of human life, and the inevitability of change. In the end, the story of Anderson Cooper and Carter Vanderbilt Cooper is not just about wealth or tragedy. It's about the enduring human spirit, the bonds of family, and the ways in which we all try to make sense of the legacies we inherit. The Vanderbilt empire may have crumbled long ago, but its final heirs, Anderson and Carter, carried its weight in their own way. Carter, with his untimely death, became part of the tragic lineage, while Anderson, through his resilience, rose above the expectations and pressures to forge his own identity. But the shadow of the Vanderbilt name will always be there. It's a name that once ruled America, and now, through Anderson, its story continues, not as one of wealth and privilege, but as one of survival, transformation, and the enduring impact of family, love, and loss.